66 million years ago, the asteroid that ended the reign of the dinosaurs struck with unimaginable force. However, it wasn't just a cataclysm. This strike ignited the magical fabric of all persisting realities, memorium, kicking the imminent evolutionary boom into overdrive. After the PETM, the world began cooling rapidly, bearing witness to the first glaciation since the Karoo Ice Age, ending 260 million years ago. Massive tectonic shifts reshaped the continents, with India slamming into Asia, birthing the Himalayas, Greenland pulling away from North America and Europe, Australia tearing itself from Antarctica, and South America drifting northwards, breaking away and opening Drake's Passage. We now stand at the brink of a new epoch, the Eocene-Oligocene boundary. Africa. As the great herds of geoliths spread across Africa, the dragons that preyed upon them evolved into massive, muscular leviathans, rivaling the largest known pterosaurs, Hatzegotteryx and Quetzalcoatlus nothrapi, with a wingspan of 30 feet and weighing in around 400 kilos. Infused with golden memorium, their wings developed reinforced struts and tensioned membranes capable of lifting prey nearly twice their own body weight, meaning all but the largest adult species of early proboscideans. On land, their bulk rendered them slow and ungainly, so to conserve energy, they adopted a swoop hunting strategy, launching from high altitude roosts, diving at terminal velocity, and striking with reinforced forelimbs, adapted for high impact trauma. Rather than land, they would then circle back, gripping the carcasses with prehensile abdominal claws and ascending with a single powerful wing beat, flying back towards their cliffside nests. With the world growing colder, the golden sands of the Proto-Saharan desert spread as more moisture is locked up in the ice caps at the poles. It is from within these arid dunes that we bear witness to the first case of convergent evolution that we've covered. The sand snooters, hailing from the Pterolithus genus, has adapted to feed upon the tiny creatures and minerals found within the sands of the deserts, evolving a shovel-like face much resembling the forest scoopers of South America, who evolved this interesting structure to consume small loose food source in leaves. The snooters sift through the sand, filtering out edible matter before launching the sand from their modified nostrils high into the air. When threatened by predators or territorial rivals, sand snooters exhibit a remarkable defensive behaviour. The herd swiftly forms a tight ring with the juveniles huddled at the centre. Adults face outwards, bodies low and broad shovels poised, while their nostrils swell with pressurised air. At the first sign of encroachment, they unleashed coordinated blasts of fine abrasive sand in wide arcs, creating a blinding storm that confuses attackers and drives them back. These sand volleys, hurled with surprising force, can scour skin and eyes, making even the most determined predator think twice before breaching the ring. In this tumultuous time period, Africa would see the rise of many of today's well-known families. Proboscideans, the real-world elephant ancestors like Phomia and Paleomastodon, already social giants, would enter powerful mutualisms with geoliths, clearing paths and exposing mineral deposits, and forming megaherds that reshaped entire ecosystems. They also adapted uniquely to the magical boom. Their small tusks developed as resonating communication tools, able to detect subterranean geolithic migrations and discharge greater tremors to communicate even further than their feet already allowed. It is impossible to talk about Africa during this time period and not mention the rise of anthropoid primates, the same species that would eventually give rise to all hominids. While it is unknown which specific species branched into what, it is within this golden window, between the waning Eocene and the cooling Oligocene, that the great split occurs. The ancestors of what will become the New World monkeys, platyrrhines, are believed to have rafted across the Atlantic when the ocean was much narrower and the currents more favourable, likely on mats of vegetation torn from storm-lashed coastlines. And those that remained in Africa continued to diversify into the Old World monkeys and apes, the catarrhines, better suited to the drier savannas and varied terrains. This divergence would ripple outwards for tens of millions of years, eventually producing howler monkeys in the Amazon, gibbons in Southeast Asia, and upright hominins on the plains of East Africa. It all began here in the shifting forests and drying river valleys of ancient Africa, a cradle not just of elephants and dragons, but of our own burgeoning minds. Antarctica, the imminent glaciation. As the world cools, the once lush temperate forests, not unlike modern New Zealand, also cool. In only a few million years, completely glaciating. Antarctica was a cradle for strange life before the ice came, however. Amongst the misty coastal woodlands stalked giant penguins, but these weren't simple fish hunters like the large Paleodipterae of history. These birds' beaks were worn from the crunching and grinding of the stone-like skin of small to medium Antarctic ocean-dwelling geoliths. Geoliths that provided a stable food source as they litter the beaches, looking much like the pebbles that they feed on themselves. Archaic false-dwarves, migrating from South America, found solace within the rich Antarctic forests, feeding upon the bountiful soils and roots of the greater beech, conifer and ginkgo trees, growing larger with the cold and greater dexterity within their digits, retaining their grasping ability to climb trees as necessary to avoid the great axe-beak predators. These musk monoliths, or mossy stone hands, cultivate groves of mosses and lichens along the grooves along their arms and back in aid of thermo-insulation, aiding their slow metabolism in maintaining homeostasis. Additionally, these layers of natural coverings also aid in camouflaging whilst huddled at the base of trees during harsh weather events. South America. Since the great acidification of the oceans, the shell geoliths that made landfall along the coasts of South America have since diversified immensely, evolving to eat all kinds of shrubbery and sedimentation and causing a great radiation across the continent. As the shell geolith species began to speciate and dominate South America's sediment-rich lowlands, riverbanks and volcanic uplifts, they presented both a novel challenge and a lucrative opportunity for the continent's apex predators. Chief among these were the terror birds, who had already cemented their status as top-tier hunters. Initially, juvenile or sickly geoliths became the primary targets, those whose shells not yet fully mineralized, or those diets had left them brittle and vulnerable. However, over generations, certain Phosphoricidae, or the terror birds, began specializing in cracking even fully calcified adult geoliths. Their beaks, already formidable, evolved into an even more robust and chisel-like structure, capable of delivering concussive blows strong enough to shatter stone. The keratinous sheath of the beaks thickened, and the cranial musculature supporting it became even more developed, with the bony crests forming to anchor increased muscle mass. These became the lithoprimo, or stone crushers. This evolutionary arms race led to an increased behavioural sophistication as well. The lithoprimo terror birds learned to herd geoliths towards rocky outcrops or dry pits where escape was difficult. Some began exhibiting tool-use behaviours such as launching small boulders with their beaks onto immobilised prey or using hard surfaces to brace their beaks during impacts. Meanwhile, the geoliths responded in turn. Some lineages began developing deeper burrow behaviours or symbiotic relationships with toxic algae and lichen that coated their shells, making them less palatable. Others evolved denser, multi-layered shell structures, forming internal ridges to diffuse concussive impacts. Still others adopted spiked or jagged protrusions along their shells to deter attacks and camouflage themselves among rocky terrain. These are known as pterocanth. Australia. On the opposite side of Antarctica, as the world's continents continue to fracture, Australia breaks away, setting its course to becoming a time capsule of life that we know today in stone. While the flora and fauna share common ancestors to those of South American and the Antarctic, already evolutionary drifts had begun. While in the large cooling forests of Antarctica the false dwarfs grew large, Australia still maintained its wet, lush rainforests, meaning that a larger body plan would not be feasible in the dense, humid thickets. Here the geoliths kept a far more slender build, their limbs lengthening in order to navigate the tree cover. Being by far the largest tree-dwelling creatures at their time, they had no natural predators once they reached adulthood. Other creatures would take advantage of this as a network of treetop family nests. The geoliths built became refuges for small marsupials, gathering food that would be eaten by both themselves and the geoliths that would become their protectors. Australia breaking away from the mainland Antarctica is the main driver of its unique fauna, most significantly the aforementioned marsupials. By 35 million years ago, as the final land bridges with Antarctica vanished beneath the cooling seas and creeping glaciers, Australia drifted northward into isolation, carrying with it a cargo of ancient Gondwana life. Marsupials, free from placental competition, diversified rapidly to fill every ecological role: burrowers, grazers, climbers and predators. The continent became a crucible of marsupial experimentation, with saber-toothed thylacinoids stalking the canopy, early diprotodonts browsed lowland forests, and bandicoot-like insectivores rooted through the underbrush. With no major land predators or hoofed mammals to compete with these lineages expanded wildly. Alongside the marsupials, Australia's warm forests and arid basins played a host to a lineage of land-dwelling crocodilians. Among them were the Micosukines, a now extinct subfamily of crocodilians that evolved a range of ecological specializations across Australia and nearby islands. Some, like Gincana, were fully terrestrial predators with long limbs and ziphodont teeth, sharp serrated edges ideal for slicing flesh, suggesting active pursuit or ambush hunting on land. These crocs likely filled the role of apex predators in forested and open environments respectively, exploiting Australia's isolation and the absence of large placental carnivores. Asia. Around 35 million years ago, Asia was a hotspot of mammalian evolution. As global cooling shrank the tropical forests, new environments, seasonal woodlands and spreading grasslands spurred rapid diversification. The perissodactyls, like early rhinoceratoids, and horse ancestors such as Mesohippus, adapted to the changing landscapes. Among them were the Ertinotherium, a tall, powerful browser, already showing the long limbs and size that would eventually culminate in its descendant, Paraceratherium, the largest land mammal to ever walk the earth. At the same time, the artidactyls, like early deer, antelopes and suiforms, and the fearsome entelodonts were spreading fast. These even-toed ungulates became more specialised for speed, endurance, and herd living, setting the stage for modern grazers and browsers. Carnivores evolved alongside them. Priodonts began to decline, challenged by the nimravids, the false saber-tooths, and early carnivorans, including bear dogs and proto-mustelids. These predators vied for dominance across Asia's forests and plains. The continent also hosted anthropoid primates, like the Eocenids. Though many would vanish as the habitats changed, some lineages would persist and migrate, laying the groundwork for the monkeys and apes in other parts of the world. As the creatures of the steppe grew larger, so did the dragons. Evolving longer legs and grasping hands, the Dromaeosaurus descendants quickly became apex hunters, the largest species having small packs of 8 to 10 members, while the smallest species having up to as many as 30 members. These creatures hunt by endurance mostly, lacking the bulk to take down the prey that hasn't been exhausted from an already long chase. The descendants of Vulcanphotia grew too, not only in length and wingspan, but many species began to become much more thick-set and powerful, able to carry much larger struggling prey, attempting to escape the fires that they spit from their mouths. As the Himalayas rise and solidify into formidable mountain ranges, the region became a sanctuary for a unique lineage of dragons. Drawn by the jagged cliffs, thermal updrafts and relative isolation from lowland predators, these dragons began to inhabit the soaring heights and craggy escarpments. Unlike their larger, more dominant kin, who ruled over the open skies and lowland plains, these highland dragons evolved with a preference for seclusion and stealth. To avoid the attention of larger aerial predators or rival draconic species, they took to living within the sheer faces of cliffs and narrow ridgelines. There they carved out homes in vertical stone, nesting where few creatures could follow. Much like swallows, they constructed their nests from a viscous, tar-like secretion excreted from specialised mouthparts. This substance hardening upon the exposure to air and adhering firmly to stone, forms bulbous, layered structures that cling to the cliff walls like oversized wasp hives. Over the generations, these nests accumulated in clusters, creating honeycomb-like colonies that dot the cliffside. Each nest contains a series of chambers lined with shed scales, vegetation, and mineral fragments that help insulate against the biting cold and high winds of the upper Himalayas. Europe. In the dense swamplands of their origin, a remarkable symbiosis developed between primitive crocodilians and a clade of opportunistic organisms known as the passengeriforms. These smaller creatures would lodge themselves within the mouths of crocodiles, disguising themselves as decaying meat or struggling prey to draw in scavengers. When curious animals approached, the crocodile would remain motionless, allowing the passenger form to strike, impaling the victim on the host's forward-facing teeth. Initially parasitic, this relationship proved so successful that it evolved into a true mutualism, with the passenger forms acting like a hyper-muscular, semi-autonomous tongue. As the chimeric pair expanded into drier, less vegetative regions, the lure tactic lost its edge, and the passenger forms adapted, becoming bulkier and more aggressive, taking on a predatory role themselves. Over evolutionary time, host and symbiote fused into a single chimeric species, and the sexual selection began to favour individuals with especially large, muscular passenger forms, a display of not only strength but of evolutionary refinement. With the steppes expanding into Europe, the dragons followed. Primarily the same Aetheropteran species that once dominated the skies of Central and Eastern Asia, but as they advanced westwards they encountered a new ecological frontier, the vast swampy lowlands of prehistoric Europe. Here, amid the flooded forests and meandering rivers, a new lineage began to diverge. These dragons gradually abandoned the skies for the water, adapting to a life of submersion and ambush. Their wings reduced into fin-like limbs, their segmented bodies grew longer and more flexible, and under the influence of memorium, dormant traits such as their gill analogues and electroreceptors were reactivated. These aquatic dragons became stealth predators, using bioelectric lures and refractive camouflage rather than fire and flight. Unlike their soaring cousins who relied on the thermal currents and combustion, the swamp-born dragons mastered silence and patience. Ghosts in the reeds, perfectly adapted to the world of shadows and still water. This evolutionary shift marked the birth of an entirely new dragon ecotype, one that would come to dominate the wetlands and inland seas. North America. In the isolated ecosystems of North America, where avian life still rules the skies, a unique arms race has taken shape. Shelled geoliths, slow-moving, stone-plated megafauna, roam the highlands and sediment-rich basins. Their mineral-dense hides natural defense against predators. But evolution, ever adapted, has birthed their airborne nemesis, the Thalornis genus. Towering over any bird alive today, with Thalornis petramone, the largest species, having wingspans exceeding 10 metres and talons capable of piercing stone. These colossal raptors have evolved the strength and strategy to crack the continent's toughest prey. Spotting geoliths from thousands of feet up, they swoop down in near silence, locking on with crushing grip strength before lifting the stony creatures skywards. Once aloft, Thalornis executes a brutal ritual, dropping its prey from height, high enough to shatter bone and shell alike. During the late Eocene, climatic cooling and the gradual fragmentation of the North American megaforests placed selective pressure on the shelled geoliths. Large, lithivorous quadrupeds adapted for passive defense. With the emergence of Thalornis, a lineage of hypercarnivorous aerial raptors capable of exploiting these slow beasts marked a turning point in geolith evolution. Their predation strategy, lifting armoured prey and dropping them from altitude, rendered static defence insufficient. In response, the subclade of geoliths underwent rapid morphological shifts, osteoderm reduction, decreased body mass, and improved mobility. Forelimb articulation and scapular rotation enabled speculative knuckle walking, and an enhanced neural development supported more complex threat assessment and spatial navigation. Over successive generations, these proto-dwarves adopted semi-erect bipedalism, retaining knuckle-assisted locomotion for stability in uneven terrain. This transitional morphology balanced mobility, dexterity and power, laying the foundation for tool use, cooperative behaviour and eventually the emergence of sapiens. By 35 million years ago, during the late Eocene, the ancestors of modern whales had already made the full transition from land to sea. These early cetaceans, members of Archaeocete lineage, particularly the balasaurids and doroodontines, displayed a striking mosaic of traits. Their bodies were fully aquatic, elongated and serpentine, with powerful tails tipped in rudimentary flukes, and forelimbs transformed into flippers. However, vestigial hind limbs still protruded near the pelvis, remnants of their artiodactyl ancestry. They were obligate carnivores, hunting fish and other marine life with the conical teeth and strong jaws. unlike modern whales, where they retained differentiated teeth and likely relied on high-frequency hearing conducted through fat pads in their lower jaw, an early precursor to the sophisticated echolocation of odontocetes. These archaic whales filled apex predator roles in the Eocene oceans, gliding through warm, shallow seas that teemed with life, even as their kin on land were disappearing. Their evolution marks one of the most dramatic ecological shifts in mammalian history, land-dwelling, hooved animals giving rise to the masters of the deep. Following the catastrophic biogeochemical upheaval of the Paleo-Eocene thermal maximum, most oceanic geolith lineages, those sediment-ingesting lithic-bodied grazers of the continent shelves, were driven to near extinction by acidified waters and disrupted nutrient cycles. For tens of millions of years, they lingered only in brackish refugia, their once thriving clades reduced to evolutionary shadows. But as global oceans stabilised and pH levels recovered, particularly with the establishment of the Antarctic circumpolar currents, a new equilibrium allowed for their resurgence. In the frigid mineral-rich waters surrounding the Antarctic coast, geoliths returned, not merely as survivors but as giants. Modern genera such as Cryostellion, Palagorhorax and Bathmargis have evolved massive, slow-moving forms using ultra-dense dermal ossifications and complex intestinal grinding chambers to process sediment and extract microflora. Some exceed 30 meters in length, functioning ecologically more like baleen whales or benthic sauropods than traditional marine fauna. These titans now dominated Antarctic benthic food webs, forming the cornerstone of a unique cold water megafauna distinct from tropical marine ecosystems. Where giants evolved, something follows to bring them down. In the nutrient-dense icy waters surrounding Antarctica, that role is filled Borastrix magnorostrum, the leviathan maw. A descendant of early toothed cetaceans, Borastrix diverged dramatically from the echolocating lineages of its kin, instead developing hypertrophied cranial structures and an elongated, beak-like rostrum packed with interlocking tusk-like teeth. Measuring over 20 meters long, it is not the fastest hunter, but a patient one, an ambush specialist. Using the dim polar light to its advantage, it stalks above the sediment-feeding geoliths, waiting for a moment when they are exposed. Then it strikes, jaws opening nearly 120 degrees, applying tremendous suction to tear soft tissues away from the armoured bulk. Its skull reinforced with shock-absorbing sinuses and mineralized cartilage, biological adaptations evolved to withstand the recoil of attacking creatures as heavy as small ships.